welcome to History Tape number 14 of It Happened in Grand Prairie. This is April the 21st, 1986, San Jacinto Day in Grand Prairie, Texas, and we are very excited about the two guests that have come to be with us today that are going to bring back more memories for Grand Prairie, Texas, and for those that watch our history tapes. Mr. and Mrs. Carl Poindexter. Carl and Nell, welcome to It Happened in Grand Prairie.
Thank you.
We're just glad to have you all with us today. It is exciting to have two long-time residents of Grand Prairie instead of old-timers to be on our show to bring back some of the things that you all have in your minds about the past of Grand Prairie, Texas. Now, Carl, you come from a family that I have found in the records and the archives in the early 1900s and probably the late 1800s. Tell me about the Poindexter family and when they originally came to Grand Prairie, and name drop a little bit about some of your great-grandparents or your grandparents or etc. And we want you to just look right out into your camera and tell us, and if you lose track, we'll come back and get you.
I'm not positive of the year that my grandparents on the Poindexter side did come to Grand Prairie.
Mm-hmm.
They came here from Illinois and settled southeast of Grand Prairie on a piece of property that is now underwater from the Dallas Power and Light Lake. Made their homestead there, and I think one of the greatest, some of the fondest memories I have is the fact that my grandma lived long enough for me to enjoy visiting her and visiting this old home place. And I very vividly remember a spring where we had watercress that we got such a kick out of, and this cool spring water that we could go out and sip, and it is a great thrill. My grandma, at the time, the Dallas Power and Light Company decided they needed that property for a reservoir. My grandma lived on it, and she sold it and died a very short time after that. And then the rest of the family, of course, was scattered in and around Grand Prairie at that time. Well, I had, I think, 5 uncles and a couple of aunts. And the other day, Ruth, I took the trip, took a little jaunt out to an old cemetery out with the Naval Air Station. That's
The little Fugate Cemetery?
Fugate Cemetery.
Yes, sir.
Practically non-existent, and I found some of my aunts, 2 of my aunts and an uncle that were buried there. Found their headstones.
How wonderful!
And it's very interesting, and that's the first time I've ever made that thing. Grand Prairie, even though it's had a metropolitan attitude, and we're thankful for it, and we never want to see it regress, because I think the worst thing in the world for you fall back into the old folks category, as you just mentioned, and you don't do that. You don't do that. You grow with it. Keep your mind alert and just reminisce occasionally. When you reach my age, all you can do is play checkers and reminisce.
Wonderful.
And I enjoy the reminiscing more than anything else, and I think it's that part of it's great. And on my mother's side, though they did not live around the Grand Prairie area but a very short period of time. They migrated here from Missouri.
And what was their name?
Their name was Hannon, Hannan.
The Hannons.
They came from Missouri down into Oklahoma. I lived in Oklahoma during the territorial days. My grandfather was a full-blooded Irishman and a real renegade. Enjoyed life. They lived up there until about the time that Oklahoma became a state, and then they moved into the Dallas or the Sherman area, actually, and slowly came on into the Grand Prairie area. There's one daughter still alive, lives here in Grand Prairie out of that family.
And give her name.
Her name is Mrs. Maureen Loves. She lives on Austrian Street.
L-O-V-E-S?
L-O-V-E.
L-O-V-E, Love. All right, now, you did not give me the name of your grandparents. Their
On my
given
father's
names.
side,
Yes.
that was John
All right.
Bourbon Poindexter,
All right.
and Elmina Poindexter.
And what was her name before she married?
Her name was Upchurch.
Upchurch. The Upchurches. Well, wonderful.
And there's still some of the graves of the old Upchurch delegation around here.
Yes, I believe I've seen those in doing some of the documentation for the
That's right.
cemeteries. I've seen the
I think
Upchurch
you'll
name.
find some of the Upchurch graves in the old cemetery over here by just off a small hill.
All right, now give us your father's name and your mother's full name.
My father's name was John Richard Poindexter.
All right.
He
Where was he born?
He was born in Grand Prairie.
Here in Grand Prairie, Texas. All right.
On their farm, their homestead out south of town, southeast of town. My mother was Cecil Lois Hannon, and she was born in Sherman, wasn't she? Sherman, Texas.
Sherman, Texas. Wonderful. And how did she find your father, who was down here in Grand
I
Prairie,
don't
Texas?
know. He robbed a cradle. She was just an infant when he married her.
Well, wonderful. We won't go into all of those good details. But now tell me how your dad found Miss Hannah in Sherman, Texas.
They had come down here for a short visit with some of their friends or distant relatives, and they were attending a picnic.
And met and married.
Yeah.
And of course, now tell me about their family, which you are a member of. How many brothers and sisters did you
I
have,
had no
Carl?
brothers or sisters.
You were the only child.
Only child. And by the way, while we're talking about that, my mother and dad were married on the 19th of June. That's their wedding anniversary. And immediately after their ceremony, they jumped in a buggy drawn by a horse and went to a colored picnic.
Yes, because that was Juneteenth.
The Juneteenth, and
Yes,
they
it was.
enjoyed it. They've thought about it so many times, and that's one way that I can remember it.
Yes.
And it's been they had a good life, had a good fruitful life.
All right. Now, when they married, where did they live in Grand Prairie, Texas?
They lived. I was born. They lived in several spots.
All right. But
Rental
where were you
houses.
born? That's a good.
I was born on the corner of Highway 80 and 5th Street, where Brown Funeral Home is.
Oh, I see. Where the school was at one time.
Well, there's an old home there, Mrs. Gutzel.
Goodsell.
And that will ring a bell because that's their descendants of the my grandfather Poindexter side of the house. Excuse me. But I was born there, and I can very well remember when Highway 80, which was actually a small street now, it's had that little
Had that little dog
turn
leg in it? Yes, sir.
They hauled dirt from a pit back of that house when I was a real small youngster. Had a donkey and a little two-wheel dump cart, and they hauled it several loads a day up there and made the road bed.
And they made the old pike. That was known as the pike
That's
then
right.
instead of Highway 80.
That's right.
And it went right down Small Street, right on down toward where.
Came out where it does now.
Yes, That's very exciting that you lived to see all of that, Carl.
That's true. That's true.
All right, now.
This ain't Mary. Ruth, if I interrupt you,
Let's go right ahead.
you never have been bashful, so
I
you
know.
just tell me what you
I
want to
certainly
think
have.
about it.
Next, I want to hear from you. You were born in the little house there. Now, where'd you go to school?
I went to school. My father's profession was packing and shipping foreman for General Portland Cement Company.
Oh, yes, we know where that's located.
We lived in a little community known as Eagle Ford. I think it's all been gulped up by Texas Industries and a number of big industries down
It's
there.
near Chalk Hill to the north, right?
That's right.
All right.
And I started the school, went there for a while, and came back and went to Grand Prairie. I think I went a couple of years, 3 years in grade school in Grand Prairie.
All right. Do you remember
Right.
any of your teachers or any of the
Oh, yeah.
superintendent or principal?
Yes.
Name drop a little for us.
Mrs. Yeager. I think, bless her old heart, everybody in town knew her and remembered her and loved her.
Exactly.
And then, of course, that was the one that I had most of the time. And then Sadie Miller, bless her heart, one of the greatest girls that ever lived. But anyway, we moved back to the living area at General Portland Cement. They had an area of homes where you could, where the key employees lived. And I started school at Eagle Ford, District number 49. Do you know where it is?
Yes, I know where that's located.
All right. I finished grade school there. Finished as valedictorian of the class.
Wonderful. How many were in your class?
7.
7. That's
7.
splendid. Okay.
And then my dad gave me the choice. We'd move into, gave to me a hard head, you know, but anyway, I had the choice. We'd move into Oak Cliff and I'd go to Sunset if I wanted to. Or we'd move further in. I could go to Oak Cliff High, or he said, just pick out where you want to go, or you go to Grand Prairie. We'll move back to Grand Prairie. And I said, well, let's move back to Grand Prairie.
Wonderful.
So
That's a good story.
We came back to Grand Prairie, and I finished high school here in 1931.
1931, with the class, name some of the members of your class in 31.
Well, I had Louise Irvin,
All right, Louise Irwin.
Dan Liggett, who's deceased, and Martha Liggett, and Mary Jean Miller, Ruth Hall, a great number of us. In 1981, we had a reunion.
50th anniversary.
Yeah, and
it?
it was so fun. It was so fun. See some of those kids that we were in school with and you hadn't seen for years, you know. We have no reason to see them.
You ought to have had a 55th one sometime during this year in '86, the sesquicentennial year. Maybe you can pull something off like that, Carl. Who knows?
Well, Louise did the other one. Let's get after Louise.
All
you
right.
go to work on that.
All right.
I think it'd be
Now,
lots of fun.
After you finished high school at Grand Prairie High School, what happened to you then? Did you go on to further education, or how did you run into this beautiful young lady to your right that you've been married to for 49
I saved her.
years?
She was headed for a hard life of spinsterhood, and so I did everything I could to pull her out of it, and I did. Brought her along real well, I think.
All right. Where did you meet Nell?
I was working in a retail food store in Grand Prairie, and Nell's parents traded in there, and they allowed her to come in and pick up the foodstuffs, you know. And Lord have mercy, she caught my eye one day, and I thought, well, I'll never give up till I get that one, I'll tell you for sure. And started hot pursuit, Ruth, and it stayed hot pursuit until I finally won.
A determined young man. All right, Nell, we're going to take him off the hot seat a minute and go to you. Now he's brought us up to the time in Grand Prairie, Texas. When did you come to Grand Prairie? And give us your maiden name and a little history about your coming in from Oklahoma, would you?
We came to Grand Prairie in 1934.
1934.
And so happened that my grandfather, Abe Shull,
The Shulls, all right.
well, had moved down here. And we had visited down here several times and liked it. And then I had a couple of uncles that was in the construction business with Gifford and Hill.
All right, and what were their names?
One was Walter Shull and one Oscar Shull.
All right.
And so we moved to Grand Prairie.
And where did you move to? In what area?
We moved to what is Gifford and Hill, where the pipe plant is now, Gifford and Hill,
On
America.
Myers Road?
They had really box cars, and we lived in those, and when they had a construction job somewhere, they would back the engine in, hook us on, and we would pull out and go to one of the jobs and be on the job maybe for 3 or 4 weeks, and then they would bring our houses back. And that was where we lived.
All right, give me your mother and father's name and your mother's maiden name.
My father and mother were Ott and Florence Boyd.
Boyd.
And when Fairview Addition was first started, they bought one of the first homes on Hickory Street and lived there for 32 years.
Is that where you were born?
No, I was born in Oklahoma.
In Oklahoma.
And then my aunt, Mrs. Floyd Wilson,
Yes.
well, they lived here too. And so it
So
was.
you had a lot of reason to be in Grand
we
Prairie.
all came down for that reason, you know. And my daddy worked for Gifford and Hill for 35 years until he had a heart attack and had to retire.
All right. Now, you were apparently already out of school when you came down here. What were you doing? Just helping to keep house and all of this good stuff?
I was in I had just finished junior high, and then I went to Grand Prairie High, where the administration building is.
Yes.
That was all of the school at that particular time, and I went to school there.
At Grand
And
Prairie?
then Carl and I married in 37, and I went right out of my father's arms into Carl's.
That was a good deal. Wonderful. And I believe that you two are celebrating your 49th wedding anniversary when?
The 16th of this month.
The 16th of this month. Isn't
So
that
it has
exciting?
passed, you see.
Yes, it has.
We're going to try for 50.
Yes, that's a good thing to try for, and then 75.
It's still on a day-by-day deal. I'm not sure about it.
You evaluate it every day.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's
the first thing that
wonderful.
happens when we get up in the morning.
Well, now we'd like for you to maybe tell us some of your early years in Grand Prairie. You didn't tell us how many brothers and sisters you had also.
I have one brother, Tom Boyd, and he is married to Christine Hill.
Wonderful.
And they lived in Grand Prairie for several years. He was with Gifford and Hill. And they have built them a home on Lake Sandlin and live down there now, that close to Jefferson, not Jefferson, Pittsburgh.
All right, now we're going to have to let you tell us about your children, yours and Carl's children. And I know of at least one that lives here in Grand Prairie, Texas, that works for Dr. Cartwright. So would you go down the line and tell us a little bit about how many children you have, and especially the ones that live in Grand Prairie, and your grandchildren, and if any of them attend a school in Grand Prairie?
Thomas Poindexter, and he lives here in Grand Prairie. He has one son, Charles. And then Sharon, that still lives with us.
Sharon lives with you.
And then Boyd Poindexter, and he lives in Mansfield. He has 2 children.
All right.
And then Carla Bartlett, and she lives in Arlington, and she has 3 children.
Wonderful.
And then Ginger lives in Cisco, and she has 1 child. And Carla and Ginger both graduated from Grand Prairie High.
Wonderful. And you have them almost all living within 50 miles here of Grand Prairie, Texas. You're not letting them leave, are you, Carl?
It's a long ways to Cisco.
It is a long way to Cisco, isn't it?
All of 2 hours.
Yes. Now, Carl, tell us about the grandchildren, will you? What do you do with these grandchildren,
Ruthie,
especially the one that live here?
The one, Thomas' son, is the only one that lives here in Grand Prairie. Carla, of course, lives in Arlington and lives out near the lake, southwest part of Arlington. And Boyd's family lives in Mansfield. We don't see them too often. We see Thomas's son more than any of the rest of them, and he's, 10, 11 years old. Great big boy. And then the one that lives in Cisco, Ginger's baby, Katie, and can you get a picture of this? is one little tooth. She is a little doll. Beautiful child, and just as ornery as the days are long, and I wouldn't have her any other way.
You think she takes after Carl now?
Exactly.
All right. Now, would you tell us how Carl reacts when all of the children and the grandchildren come to your home for Christmas or something like that?
Well, the first thing he does is take his hearing aids out.
I see.
And then the second thing he does, he'll sit for a while and then go to his room and shut the door, the bedroom.
After he's had about 4 hours of this, that's almost enough?
2 hours almost will do it.
All right. Now, what do you and Carl do now that Carl has retired from some of the most illustrious jobs? Carl, tell us about some of the wonderful people that you have been employed by and what your status was. You were very, very important in the Safeway chain and some of the other chains. Tell us something about your business life.
Ruth, I was never in Safeway. I learned to love the grocery business through the old Sergeant's Grocery Company. I wasn't pushed towards it. I pushed myself. I loved it. It's a every day that you open the door and go in and start doing business, it's a challenge to Mrs. Jackson when she comes in. And what am I going to sell her today?
Did you start out at Sergeant's Grocery
I started
then?
with Sergeant's Grocery. Started as a...
Mr. C.R. Sargent?
Yeah, right. I started as a meat cutter. And I knew a piece of bologna after it's sliced, but that is all. And in that day and time, you didn't have slicers, and I had to slice it by hand. You didn't have refrigerated holding spots or refrigerated counters. It was done by ice. And it was hard work, it was backbreaking work, but it was such a challenge, knowing people and meeting people. And then after I left him, I went into the military first. I spent 3 years in the service,
What branch?
Air Force.
In the Air Force, okay.
And when I came out, then I didn't know whether I wanted to go back in the grocery business or not. And I tinkered around with another thing or two, and nothing pleased me. Because when I'd go home of an evening and sit down, there was a void spot. And I hadn't accomplished what I intended to do for that day. So I got to analyzing myself real closely, and then I went to work, and again for sergeant. And when I left them, and stop or two, immaterial, the amount of time or what have you, I went to work for the Tom Thumb Page organization.
Yes.
Started out in their warehousing end of it, and I moved up to, finally, before I retired, I became vice president of warehousing and transportation and vice president of the food service organization, which serviced restaurants and institutions such as that. Very, very, very good, interesting piece of work. And some of my best friends are involved in it. Jack Evans, who has been the mayor of Dallas, is a very dear friend, still involved in it. He has a son that's involved in it. Charlie Cullum, one of the greatest persons that you ever hope to meet. And his brother, Robert Cullum, who passed away 3 or 4 years ago. But you meet people and you love them and you pursue them. You never saw an old grocerman in your life that didn't, I guess the first thing you look at when you open the paper in the morning is the obituary column. See if you're in it, and if you're not, then you look and see if somebody else is in it.
Some
that
of your
you know.
good friends.
And
I
it's
see.
typical of them. But it's not a profession you go into if you don't love it.
If you don't like people.
Yeah. And if you like it, well, fine and dandy, you go with it and you stay with it. I wouldn't back up one iota. Not one time.
Not one.
I wouldn't swap anything that I've done for anything that I can see today.
And all of this time, were you living in Grand Prairie, Texas, when you were working at all of this?
We-
Home base was Grand Prairie.
We had an interim period of what now, about 5 years at Arlington, 4 or 5 years.
About almost 15, Carl.
The kids, the boys were raising cattle to show in the 4-H club, and I woke up one morning and they got to thinking more about automobiles and girls than they did cattle, and the weeds were about to eat us up, and I said, "Whoa, let's get a hold of a realtor and sell this thing and get out of it," and then we came on back to Grand Prairie.
Back to Grand Prairie, Texas.
Yeah.
All right, now, in Grand Prairie, Texas, as you've watched it grow, what do you think has been the most important thing that changed Grand Prairie, and what impressed you the most in the changing of all of this good stuff?
I think first is when North America aviation plant came to Grand Prairie. It brought people, which we needed to change because we had people here that did not want to change, and we definitely needed it. And I think that helped as much, and from that we have begun to grow, and they have begun to recognize us in Grand Prairie. And I think people like you help because you do advertise Grand Prairie in a good light. And
I think that I believe more people on the show have said North American had the greatest impact
I think
of
it did.
anything.
That was the only impact that Grand Prairie had ever had up until that time.
Nell, in the early days in Grand Prairie, how did you get around from here to Dallas or from here to Arlington?
by bus,
You rode the bus.
rode the bus. Because at that time, cars were almost at a premium. And it was a treat to go into Dallas.
Did you ever ride the interurban that used to go through Grand Prairie?
No, I
Texas?
never did, but Carl remembers it.
Did you ever ride the interurban,
I
Carl?
think it's, now I can look back and I think the worst thing in the world ever happened when they took it out.
I agree. And did you know that I rode that very interurban to school? And I certainly am sad that it really left the scene. It would have been wonderful to have had it with us still.
We have gone on outings, groups of us, and ride it to where to Sherman one time, Denison one time, just for the trip, and rode it to Waco one time. It's
an exciting trip, wasn't it?
And then this past year, we went down into East Texas and rode that
The little train.
Train.
And it's just, and I'm not an old fuddy-dud, but I like to relive those things.
Wonderful. Now, Carl, yes.
Before North American came, there was not too much entertainment in Grand Prairie. And we used to park our cars on the street early Saturday morning, and then Saturday night go sit in them and watch the people go by. That was the biggest entertainment in Grand Prairie at that
way
particular
you had
time.
your parking
Yes.
spot all set
Otherwise,
aside for you.
because Grand Prairie was just about 2 blocks long at that particular time.
And 2 lanes of highway, the rest of it was gravel.
Carl, I'd like for you to bring to your mind when you were growing up, say that when you were in your last years of high school here, who were some of the important leaders in Grand Prairie, Texas, some of the men that impressed you, or maybe a teacher that really inspired you?
Mr. Hudspeth, I don't know whether you hear his name
He's the
very much.
superintendent, yes.
Was a real inspiration to me. He was a very, I considered a very solid citizen. And then we had later had a superintendent by the name of C.B. Gentry that I absolutely loved. I thought he was one of the greatest guys in the world. Dewey Miller, I never was closely associated with him, but I always looked upon him as a leader in anything that he set out to do. And there were so many of them that, I don't know, I think I'd probably missed part of them if I tried to really truly run down the line. But my parents were very strict about me walking the streets.
I see.
When you get out of school, you come home. When you get through that, you come home. And always tried to do it. And the only place I ever went was to the grocery store and to the barber shop.
And who was the barber? Tell me about the barber.
Ralph Walker's daddy.
Ralph Walker that runs
Absolutely.
the minnow shop?
Yeah.
All right, Ralph Walker's dad was the barber.
Yeah.
Tell me what his name was and where his shop was
Well,
located.
let's see what if I can think of his name. Given name.
And where,
His shop is on the south side of what is Main Street now, about in there about where Marie's shop is. somewhere
about where
along there.
Marie's shop is along there. I did not know that he had a barber shop
Oh,
there.
yes.
How
sir.
many chairs was in his
Well,
shop?
I think I believe there was 2.
And was there someone else that worked in there with him?
No.
No?
He'd have some transients come through and work
Yes.
a few days, but he was basically the barber. He's the one that you swore by. And if you wanted some real poop on the town or what was fixing to happen, well, you go in and sit down with Brother Walker, and he could tell you all about it, and he would.
All
He's
right,
happy
now
to.
was he before or after the Izora and Bill Graham's barber shop?
They were a short time after him. But they were, and then there was another one that you must remember, never forget, is a guy by the name of Corpier.
Mr. Ross Carpier's dad?
Yeah, that was a barber.
Was
in
he a
town.
barber? Where
Yeah.
was he located?
He was around the corner on Center Street
All right.
for a while, and he's up on Main Street for a while. There's 2 or 3 shops there on Main Street. And then Sam Sanders,
Yes, I remember Sam Sanders, and where was his place?
he was on Main Street for a while, and he's around on the side street for a while. I don't know, I never could understand why the guys moved back and forth. I guess the rent had a little bit sway in them, you know.
That probably had a little something to do with it. Well, Carl and Nell, you all aren't going to believe how time has flown, but what is this?
This is a branding iron, Ruth. This is what you branded cattle with.
And that's your,
That was my grandfather's brand. It's recorded, it was recorded before the 1900s in Dallas County and registered in the state too. And in about 1921, my dad liked to tinker with cattle, a hobby.
yes.
So he bought some cattle and he decided he had to have an iron, and the original iron, of course, was misplaced. And this, in 1921, Mr. Dick Stubbs, Stubbs Blacksmith
Yes.
Shop, made this iron, and I had the privilege to stand in and watch him do it. It was beaten out on an anvil, and and I wouldn't part with it for anything in the world. In fact, we keep it hanging over a fireplace. It's not the most decorative thing in the world, but
It's exciting.
it's a conversation piece.
Thank you all so very much for being with us on It Happened. We want to thank you for the memories that you brought back to us from Grand Prairie over the years that y'all have lived here. And Nell and Carl Pondexter, you're very important to us. And this is Ruthie Jackson reminding you that history is as we live and do.